Attention, armchair quarterbacks and shower thought GMs. It's time for this week's episode of SportsBall with Mike Maharrey and Alan Mosley. Wait, is this starting?
I'm glad we could have that cheery conversation right before the...
Yes. It's not exactly putting me in the SportsBall frame of mind.
Well, just imagine the people involved as Florida and South Florida.
Wow.
Guys, welcome back for another episode of SportsBall. I am your host, Alan Mosley, joined as always by Tampa Bay sports superfan Mike Maharrey. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I got my my Yulee high school shirt.
I see that. Go ahead and tell everybody what famous person we all know came from there.
Well, there's a pretty decent running back that came out of the Yulee High School. Plays for the Tennessee Titans. Last name Henry.
You mean
first name Derek?
Used to be pretty good. Oh,
guys, he had a pretty good game last week.
He did have a pretty good game. He's still outside the top 5 in rushers, but the fact that like only being the 6th best rusher in total yards means he's washed up. I think most teams would take that.
Absolutely.
With that said, guys, we're going to start off the way we always do with some shit announcers say.
Constantly spanking him.
Covering on the play, 2 fags in the offensive backfield. 2 fags in the offensive backfield. 2 fags.
Constantly spanking him.
Me, I'm thinking about Katy Perry.
Constantly spanking him.
You got your knee down and you got to push and you go, don't talk to me. And then you have to
constantly spanking him.
The 10th of the season so far by the Big D of Denver.
Constantly spanking him.
You got to flush that thing down the toilet like you're goldfish in 4th grade, man. That thing's dead and gone.
Constantly spanking him.
No one has more sacks than Aaron Donald.
Well, there, you just take him wherever, right? If he's totally naked, there's certain places you can't take him. Right?
All right.
Constantly spanking him.
With each passing week, Peyton Manning becomes a larger percentage of the total number of clips. But moving on, we also had this week, the referees were at it again. It's time for...
Adventures in Officiating.
Thank God the Packers still won this game, otherwise you wouldn't hear the end of it. Check out this play. New England is down 14-10 to Green Bay, 5.5 left in the third quarter. They get a delay of game, which you know doesn't make Bill Belichick happy. But third-string starter Bailey Zappi, wait a minute, it was a delay of game again. None of this is going to count, right? I know the Green Bay defenders aren't really dogging it because the play's dead. It's a delay of game. But wait. There's some kind of discussion on the sideline between the referees, and long story short, the play counts. They say touchdown New England, despite the play clock having gone 3, 2, 1, 0, 0, 0, and then snap the ball. Take a look at this right here. 3, 2, 1. All right, it's a delay of game. Still a delay of game. Oh, and we're going to snap the ball. Now, the line you hear from officials is that they're watching the clock, and when the clock reaches 0, they turn their eyes to the ball. If the ball is still sitting unmoving, it is a delay of game. So there's like a half a second, transition there. But you see right there, the reason that says 40 is because when it hits 0 and stays on 0 for a full 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, it just resets the play clock automatically. Right. Because the play clock is dead, it's a delay of game. Mike Maharrey, go ahead and tell me why getting to have an extra 3 or 4 seconds to snap the ball is totally legal and Green Bay shouldn't complain.
Well, obviously it's because of the reasons.
Well, this is an interesting one because generally on Adventures in Officiating, we will have a flag on the field, and the debate is whether or not the flag was legit or how the officiating is carried out. In this case, it's a no call, but this is not a no call where it's subjective, right? Like it's the number goes to 0, you throw a flag. There's no interpretation of the rules.
Right.
However, apparently this is something. Get ready for it. All those cameras and all those rules, it's unreviewable.
Well, I mean, we're dealing with a game here that still measures the ball using 2 sticks with old men holding them in a chain between them. So what do you expect?
That is true. I have noticed that they're really going hot and heavy on the pylon cams. Have you noticed that this
I
season?
have, yeah.
So we've got the pylon cams, but we also have the sticks cams, so that throughout the game you can constantly see the line where the line of scrimmage would be or the line of game would be. But you're right. Despite all this ingenuity, we still live in a world where we'll have review, but only for certain calls, because other calls are just objective truths, except for, when they're not.
I had a real quick adventure in officiating watching the FSU Wake Forest game on Saturday. They actually reviewed a play to figure out what down it was. Like the refs, all of them apparently forgot what down it was.
This is actually the second week in a row we've had this happen. So people will recall last week in the Oregon-Washington State game, they skipped second down and went straight to third down.
That's
and
right.
Our adventure in officiating was after the punt had already happened on fourth down and possession had already transferred to Oregon, they actually decided to hop in the time machine and go back to the previous third down to try again to make up for the fact that there was no second down, which, by the way, that still doesn't solve the problem. And two, how can we possibly reach a point where each week we're having adventures in officiating where we don't know what down it is? You know how there's those sticks that go 1, 2, 3, 4 when you pull on the lever?
Right.
How can you get this wrong?
I don't know. That could potentially deserve a puck to the head, but not this week. But I do have a puck. So this week's puck, this is kind of, I don't know, probably an obviously one, but the Miami Dolphins medical staff. So at the risk of causing another concussion, I'm going to shoot this week's puck at the head of the aforementioned medical staff, who cleared Tua Tagovailoa to play after the hit that you just saw during the win over the Bills. He basically crumpled. He had to be helped off the field by linemen. They said it was a back injury. Now, I've blown out a disc in my back. That ain't no back injury. So make matters worse, 4 days later, Tua's back out on the field against the Bengals. He's sacked. D lineman, you can kind of see, turns him over and rolls him on his head. But it's pretty scary. I mean, you look at his hands. That is actually called decorticate posturing, and it is a sign of a brain stem injury.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's not good. So, like I said, the hit wasn't particularly violent, at least in my view, but having just suffered a concussion 4 days later, that impact was magnified. And it's pretty clear to me that he should not have been out there with a broken brain.
Official injury report, by the way.
Yes, exactly. So the Dolphins did ultimately fire the independent neurologist that cleared him to play, but there was a breakdown all the way through the system that, they're talking about he may not play again. There's concussion specialists out there that are advising that he shouldn't. So pretty scary and definitely deserving of a puck.
Well, I know it reminds a lot of people, because a lot of people were saying, this might be a legal matter. There's people that are put in positions of authority to make authoritative decisions on player safety, on health, more now than ever before. And how did this happen? And it's kind of one of those perfect storms of situations where, for one, the players always say, "I'm good, coach, put me back in." That's right. Why you have to have other people, the coaches, the staff, the trainers, the doctors, being able to have some say in that decision, because the players will always want to play. Right. I mean, for one, these guys have egos the size of mountains, but two, this is their livelihood. They get paid a lot of money to be on the field, not to be on the bench.
We had a repeat performance the following week with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers tight end Cam Brate.
Yes,
took a nasty hit, and Tony Dungy said he was next to him on the sideline, said he was clearly had his bell rung, but he told the medical staff, hurt my shoulder. So they checked out his shoulder. He ended up playing the rest of the half, and then went out with the concussion protocol. So again, you've got this independent person that's supposed to be upstairs observing this, and it's breaking down.
Well, it reminds us. You might remember a few years back when perennial backup Tyrod Taylor was still on the staff of the who was it, the San Diego Chargers at that time, wasn't it?
Right.
and I think he was getting fluid removed, or he was having some kind of injection, and the doctor pierced his lung.
Oh yeah, I remember
with
that.
the syringe. Now, needless to say, that basically set him back for a year in rehab and everything else, because that's not something you just rub a little dirt in and walk off.
Right.
They've actually escalated that to the point where I think Tyrod actually has lawyers, and they're looking at suing the staff for that situation.
Well, I mean,
malpractice. I could totally see that happening here. I mean, if there's anything that Tua has going for him, is that he was the entrenched starter, right? He was the high-level draft pick. He was the starter. There's a lot of money, a lot of clout involved in that decision. For somebody like a Tyrod, somebody like a Brait for the Buccaneers, a lot of journeyman players who are not the faces of the franchise, that they're willing to play through a lot to stay on a team, because this is the difference between them not having a career at all versus them making a roster.
Right.
For them to be treated this way, is a little bit yikes.
Yep.
So, I don't know. The puck might have to be fired at the whole NFL for that.
Oh, all right.
Speaking of trying to make a roster, let me show you what I would do, Mike Maharrey, if
right.
I was playing in the NFL with some... I can do that. I want you to take a look at this play right here between the Raiders and Denver Broncos. Oh, it's a fumble. It goes straight to the Raiders' defensive secondary. I want you to take a look at the end of this play right here. Number 72 of the Broncos. Does he have the angle? I don't know. What? You know what? I'm willing to say good on him for giving effort to the end, but yeah. And then followed up by our streaker, who apparently we've got word this guy was trying to raise awareness for pigs who had been rescued from a kill farm. And Bobby Wagner shows a lot more grit against the streaker than he ever did for the 49ers that night in what was an abysmal loss on Monday Night Football. A little extra note for this one that just came out yesterday. That streaker is actually filing a police report against the Rams and Bobby Wagner for the hit.
Yikes. I liked Wagner's comment on it. He's like, look, there's consequences for your actions.
Yes.
Something seems to be lost on society these days.
Yes, there absolutely is. I will say, though, I prefer the old days where when there was some type of disturbance on the field, they would just show it on cameras. Nowadays, they don't do that because I guess the idea is that you don't want to encourage more of this type of activity. But that was the biggest hit the Rams delivered all night, and we didn't get to see it on national TV.
We did.
Finally, we got some cowardly coaches coaching cowardly.
Oh, no.
But I'll have you know, we're not doing all football today. This is actually from the world of the MLB. Take a look at this. Yankees manager Aaron Boone decides to tell pitcher Luis Severino, who had a no-no alive through 7 innings in what would prove to be a 3-1 Yankees win over the Texas Rangers, he's going to have a seat. He's taking him out of the game. He won't be coming back for the next inning. Now, you can see in this video here, Severino just doesn't look at him. Doesn't even look at his manager while he's being told this, and just shakes his head no over and over again while the rest of the dugout just kind of looks on. I tell you what, I'm going to call it, obviously, what is a manager Aaron Boone saying? He's saying, I need to save you for the postseason. I can't risk anything going wrong in what is basically a meaningless game at this point. Let's think to the future. But I got to say, number one, this wasn't just any old game. He had a no-no through 7 innings. Come on. I mean, I feel like it's an unwritten rule. You got to let the pitcher try to take it to the end. That's number one. And number two, even if you have a legitimate situation where you're an excuse as to why you're pulling the guy, what kind of message does this send? We've all been inundated for the last several weeks, if not months, with Judge Watch, where we're all watching Aaron Judge chase a home run record that's not really a record because he's not going to come close to Barry Bonds, just FYI. I'm sorry, I don't care what you think about injections or whatever. The fact of the matter is that his name is not on the top of the list in the record books. But I don't see Aaron Judge having designated hitters the last few weeks. Do you?
No.
I don't see that. And furthermore, what kind of message does this send to the dugout? I don't know. I understand you wanting to save some of your best pitchers for the postseason, make sure their arms are in good shape. But what I don't get is sowing dissent between you and your pitching staff and creating turmoil in the locker room right before the postseason.
Yeah. Well, this is what you get in a world where baseball is becoming more and more dominated by analytics.
Yes.
And they had him, I guarantee you, they had him on a pitch count. He hit that pitch count, you're coming out. They did the same thing to Blake Snell in a playoff game for the Rays. He was mowing through everybody. They got to his pitch count and pulled him out, and then ended up losing the game. So, sometimes managers need to manage with their guts. The metrics and the all of that data is good and is useful, but at some point you got to know in your gut, we're going to let this guy go. He's got a no going, right?
Speaking of knowing things in your gut, we're going to come back after the commercial break to talk about what coaches might already be on the hot seat in this early NFL season and what fans are expecting what teams to replace their guys leading the charge. Right after this commercial break, don't go away. If you're enjoying this afternoon's episode of SportsBall, consider supporting the program by joining our Patreon over at patreon.com/Alan Mosley. Tune in to It's Too Late with Alan Mosley, Wednesday nights at 9 o'clock Eastern Time on your favorite video platform of choice. Just search Alan Mosley TV.
I'm ready to mow.
All right. Why is it you always seem to be mowing right before we do sports ball?
I didn't mow. I was not mowing today. I was at the gym.
Well, that's just because you have a hurricane to deal with. You don't mow anymore. Doesn't that deal with it? Or does that just make it worse?
It really had no impact on it whatsoever. Actually, I mowed right after the storm in order to get all the little sticks and stuff, grind them up. So,
guys, we're moving on to what was the theme of today's episode, which is the hot seat. We're only 4 weeks into the NFL season, and instead of talking about the coaches who may or may not be the first to be fired, we're going to go through a list, 5 for the AFC and 5 for the NFC. There's going to be some coaches on there that you might think are good candidates to be the first ones fired this year. Some other coaches with long established tenures where some of their fan bases are starting to wonder, do they have the juice left to turn the ship around? We're going to start with one that might be a little bit of controversial. Mike, what do you think about New England Patriots head coach Bill Belichick? The Patriots do not look like the Patriots, and frankly haven't for a little while. They had a little bit of kind of that rookie luck with Mac Jones when he first came in, but that season fell off sharply. Now with him out of the lineup and with Brian Hoyer out of the lineup as well, it might be tough times for the Patriots, and Bill's not getting any younger. Where do you rate the heat of his seat?
I think his seat's pretty cool. And several of these coaches we're going to talk about, I think, have enough credit in the tank to get them through the tough times. And I think Belichick is one of those. He's such a part of that New England institution. And I think the ownership there, the Crafts, not the Crafts. Yeah, the Crafts. Mm-hmm. I think they're pretty loyal to Bill. I don't think his seat's really hot. Now, it could get hot. He's not immune. I mean, ultimately, it's always about wins, but I don't think I'm going with pretty cool.
I'm going to say that it's not warm, but it's not freezing cold, based largely on the fact that if you're looking to the future here, the Patriots are probably in for some tough times ahead. And they're in a division now where the Jets are not good, but not a free win. And suddenly the Dolphins and Bills are good, like not just okay, they're good. The Patriots might be the worst team in that division. I don't think Patriots fans want to have the worst team in the AFC East.
Probably not.
We're going to move on to a controversial one. We were talking about Tua Tagovailoa earlier.
Tagovailoa.
What do you think about Mike McDaniel? Now, the Miami Dolphins, this is his first season taking over for Brian Flores, and they've rocketed out to an early 3-1 record. Their only loss this past week when Tua couldn't finish the game against the Bengals. They have those exciting late game wins against both the Bills and the Ravens. Potentially even a favorite in the AFC, not counting the Kansas City Chiefs as well. And yet, I've seen coaches go down for controversies a lot less than letting your star quarterback's brain turn to jelly. Does this put him, in your mind, at serious risk?
I don't think he's at serious risk, but he does have the look of a scapegoat.
Ooh.
And if things continue to devolve, I think that he could look even more like a scapegoat. And it's interesting reading some of the media. He's getting very defensive already. And I don't think that bodes well. He's like, I'm not talking about this. I'm not worried about this. Well, I'm not worried about this means I'm worried about this. So I think it's a little warmer than people might think, despite the success that you've seen on the field.
I think this is probably the hottest seat that a rookie coach with a 3-1 record could ever possibly have, and that's an off-field distraction caused by your own poor choices. You're right that the worst thing Mike McDaniel did, other than letting Tua play, is immediately going to defend that decision and defend the organization as opposed to own up to it. Yep. That's not a good look. We're going to move on. This might be another controversial one. In his 16th year as head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mike Tomlin. Now, there's a lot of Steelers faithful out there that would argue that Mike Tomlin has been on a little bit of a tenuous situation with the Steelers for a number of years now. That Super Bowl win was relatively early in his tenure, and with the steady decline of Ben Roethlisberger, so has the steady decline been of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, he might not have had a losing season up to this point, but a lot of people think this is the year. Now, if you're a guy that hasn't had a losing season for 16 years, you can argue that that's plenty of goodwill in the tank. On the other hand, they expect you to not have a losing season. They're probably certainly in for a losing season this year. What do you think of Mike Tomlin?
I think it's getting a little toasty in the Tomlin seat, but I also think he has a lot of rope for two reasons. Number one, 15 years of relative success buys you a lot of credibility. And number two, the ownership there is very, very faithful to their coaches and to kind of that tradition. So I don't think he's in trouble this year. I think if they get off to a bad start again next year, then it's going to get hot pretty quick.
So, yeah, I kind of agree. I don't think he's in immediate trouble. I think with a lot of these long-term entrenched coaches, it's not that we're saying that they're going to be fired this season. It's that it has been noticed that the program is not moving in the direction they want it to. We're going to move on. Lovey Smith. Now, this is another guy. Poor Lovey. Everybody likes Lovey the man.
Yeah.
But Lovey the head coach, the problem with Lovey is that, again, this is only his first year with the Texans, and generally you feel like that means you're not going to have the trigger pulled on you in your first season, though it wouldn't be the first time that's happened, and not in recent years either. But Lovey Smith strikes me as a guy that if you're going to hire a retread to be your coach, you expect them to have learned from their mistakes in their previous outings. He absolutely, by the first few weeks of the season, as any indication, has not learned anything about how to change his style going into the Houston Texans, who currently are the worst team in the NFL. What do you think, Mike?
Well, you've already alluded to it. If David Culley can get fired after year one, so can Lovey Smith. There's precedent there. And didn't he kind of feel like a hire that was kind of meant to be temporary anyway, just kind of a stopgap? I mean, I don't know. It's not a sexy hire to begin with. I think his seat's pretty damn hot.
I kind of agree. I don't think that he'll be the first person fired out of the current 32 head coaches, but I think he will be one of the first few of the current 32 head coaches. We're going to move on to the last one for the AFC. Mike Vrabel of the Tennessee Titans. Now, this is a team that's been to the playoffs the last few years, was the number one seed in the AFC just last year. Been riding high on the back of workhorse Derrick Henry, but Derrick Henry's getting older. It doesn't matter how good your team is or isn't. He's going to get older, and Ryan Tannehill perhaps is proving that maybe he's not the guy that's going to get him there. But furthermore, Mike Vrabel's biggest issue with the current push against him is talking about being loyal. Perhaps he's a little bit too loyal to his own staff, including his offensive coordinator, that, let's just face it, offensive play calling and discipline, which is a coach's job. That's where you point the finger. Those have been the issues that brought the Titans to 0-2 before they rebounded to 2-2. Is Mike Vrabel seriously in trouble?
Well, 2-2 is a bad look for that team given the expectations, and they've looked bad getting to 2-2. I still think he can ride a little bit on his past success, but I've always kind of felt like he was a little bit more tenuous in his position than I've always felt like they've kind of overachieved and won despite what what we've seen with the coaching and whatnot. So I think it could get hot quick. Let's put it that way.
I think the Titans are at an interesting crossroads where they definitely come off as overachievers. They remember last year they had the best record in the AFC despite a record number of injuries. They had far and away the most injuries in the league, and yet were the number 1 seed. A lot of people were willing to applaud good coaching as the reason that was. And a lot of people say that the GM, John Richardson, is the reason why the Titans have become, instead of being that perennial 500 team under Jeff Fisher all those years ago, have become a legitimate contender year in and year out. But if you're a legitimate contender because of your management on the front end, and you have such great stock of players that you can suffer, something like 80 injuries during the season and yet have that kind of record, then when you start a season and everyone is firing on all cylinders, you can't start the season 0-2.
Right.
So that blade cuts both ways. We're going to move on to the NFC. Now, this is the guy that is everyone's pick to be the first one fired this year, and for good reason. Matt Rule, by the way, that picture sums up the Rule tenure in Carolina. Matt Rule and the Carolina Panthers, a lot of people felt like there was a chance he would have gotten fired last year. A lot of people feel right now that he's going to be the first guy fired this year, and rightfully so for their performance on the field. But not only that, a lot of coaches ultimately get tied to the quarterback position for better or worse. They try to upgrade the quarterback position by going out and getting Baker Mayfield. Baker has been abysmal, and now granted, Sam Darnold has been on IR, and he should be back soon. But I'm not sure anything saves him at this point. What do you think?
Yeah, a dead man walking. When you start reading reports of who they're talking about as the interim, Steve Wilkes, by the way. Yeah, that's bad news when you start seeing that come out. He's not going to last much longer.
Moving on to another one that might be a little bit more of an obvious choice. Detroit Lions head coach Dan Campbell. Now, the Lions have been an interesting team this year because they, believe it or not, did you know the Lions have the number 1 offense in the NFL?
I didn't know that.
Sad thing is that their defense is so bad that having the number 1 offense in the NFL means you can't win a football. You can't win a football game, and against not exactly stellar competition, by the way. Dan Campbell is right there near Matt Rule in terms of expectations. I think the most damning thing for Dan Campbell is the fact that after yet another week where they gave up so many points, their offense just couldn't keep up. He immediately wanted to deflect from the defense and say, well, the offense left some points out there on the field. That's a real quote by him this past week. Does that sound like a coach who's long for this world, Mike?
Yeah. I don't know. He's popular. Mm-hmm. And he came in, of course, I'm just going to say he's coming in to a rebuilding project. Of course, the Detroit Lions have always been a rebuilding project, so there's that. I still think he's got a little bit, maybe longer leash, and we might see something where he fires a defensive coordinator, and maybe gives himself a little bit of a runway. I don't think he's in as big a danger as Lovey, to be honest.
Okay. That's actually a whole debate in of itself of who's in more danger than another between all these guys who I think won't be coaching 3 years from now.
Right.
We're going to move on to Riverboat Ron Rivera, who's now coaching the Washington Potomac Drainage Indigenous Persons. Riverboat Ron started his tenure at Washington on a fairly good note, took him to the playoffs, although keep in mind they went to the playoffs with a losing record because the NFC East was yikes that year.
Yes.
He followed that up with another losing record, but not making the playoffs, and then followed it into this season with an abysmal start to the year. Carson Wentz proving the Eagles right in giving up on him and moving on from him at the quarterback position to Jalen Hurts. I think Riverboat Ron has a little bit of sympathy because of the whole story of him surviving cancer and coming back to lead a program and all that. But the fact of the matter is that he's not coaching in Carolina anymore for a reason.
Yep.
And you and I talk about this all the time, Mike, hiring coaches who were just fired for bad performance for the same job.
Yep. Great story. But Rivera is now 27-38 since 2017. Ooh. Yeah. His last winning season as coach of the Panthers was 2017. And, he's known as having these tough defenses. The Washington defense is a sieve. I think he's red hot. He's not going to last much longer either.
I think this past weekend was a bit of an indictment for him. I know the Redskins have tended to win close, ugly games where the score was relatively low. But let's face it, a Cowboys team that no one thinks is better than the Eagles, who's on their backup quarterback, went in there and scored 25 points, which was plenty against a team that can only put 10 on the board.
Yep.
Again, coaches tend to be tied to the quarterback position. I don't know what Ron Rivera thinks of Carson Wentz or if that's the guy he really wanted, but that's the guy he's got, and they can't win. All right. Penultimate choice, another old fella. I know he only looks like he's 20. This guy's actually 160 years old.
Yes.
It's Pete Carroll, head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. Now, this is another guy who has had a lot of clout, been given a long leash to make a lot of decisions for the franchise, upwards to and including letting Russell Wilson walk. He's with the Denver Broncos now. I think the question for Pete Carroll is maybe less, can the team win at all, but maybe more, are their best days behind him, and does a guy at his age with the kind of turnover they've had basically across the board, does this guy have the juice left in the tank for another run?
I don't think so. I don't think he'll get fired, but I think he will be nudged out the door, so to speak, into the green pastures of retirement.
Yeah. I kind of agree. I used to hate Pete Carroll for his time at USC, and let's all face reality. He left town because he knew the NCAA was on their way. Like, come on, let's all call a spade a spade. With that said, he's had a perfectly successful tenure at Seattle. But yeah, the between the Legion of Doom and then Russell Wilson cooking, those days are, God, I mean, that's a long time ago now. Yeah. It feels like yesterday. It wasn't yesterday. Those are years ago at this point.
You know, it's interesting to look at some of these quarterbacks that we're talking about who have been, or not quarterbacks, coaches who have been around for a while. Pete Carroll, Bill Belichick, Mike Tomlin. They're all tied. You mentioned being tied to a quarterback. These guys are all tied to Tom Brady, to Russell Wilson. So it's interesting because once you see those quarterbacks gone, then all of a sudden their coaching looks a lot more pedestrian.
Here's another one. Is this also a little controversial?
This
Speaking of being tied to a quarterback. Yes, it is. Cliff Kingsbury, head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. This is a guy who was a young coaching wonderkin. He was going to be the next Sean McVay.
Yeah.
The next young guy. He's got players on his team older than him, but he knows how to draw them up. He knows how to call his plays. He knows how to manage star power in the locker room. This guy is going to be the next Super Bowl winner for decades to come. Arizona nabs him. What does he do first thing? He brings in Kyler Murray, his quarterback from college, who can run the system he wants to run on day one. The problem is that Kyler Murray, for all the physical tools he might have, he's backsliding. Let's just call it what it is. He's backsliding on his career. And Cliff Kingsbury, who at one point in time, the Cardinals were a trendy pick to be a postseason favorite, now suddenly find themselves not overly competitive in their own division and losing ugly games to inferior competition. I think he already had a season where Kyler Murray carried the team about as far as he could, which turned out, frankly, to be not that far. And now this year, not even Kyler Murray can do it for him. Is Cliff Kingsbury, all that hype, all that youth and optimism, is he in trouble?
I think he is. And I think it's as much of anything expectations. You know, I think Arizona, to me, is one of the most surprisingly bad teams in the NFL this year. It's a team that I expected to be much better, much more competitive. And you see them struggling as they are. I think it's going to get really hot really fast for Cliff if they don't figure out how to turn things around.
I agree. So I think with Kyler Murray, this is a young guy who's going to be nearing the end of his rookie contract soon. The entire franchise is going to have some big decisions to make. Do they want to pay $200 million to Kyler Murray? Is he proven in the last year or two that he's the guy for another decade? And if not, maybe you're just cleaning house. I don't know.
Yeah.
Speaking of cleaning house, it's time to put on our solemn faces, folks, for In Memoriam, where we remember a player, a team, a coach, whoever, whose sporting life was cut tragically short. Mike, who are you remembering this week?
Former Wisconsin Badgers coach Paul Chryst. He got the axe after the Badgers got blown out 34-10 by the mighty Illini. Wisconsin is now 2-3 on the season, 0-2 in the Big Ten. Chryst Chris has been the Badgers coach since 2015. He's compiled double-digit wins in his first 3 seasons, but the program has been basically trending backward since then. That said, the dude's never had a losing season. Nevertheless, the old 3 yards in a cloud of dust offense of Wisconsin simply isn't cutting it in the modern pass-happy era. I mean, you can get away with it when you have a running back with the last name Taylor, but otherwise not so much. It also didn't help that Chris literally doesn't have a recruiting department. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Apparently that's a problem in major college football, and that's why he's in memoriam.
As a random side note for your in memoriam, Mike, I read an article 4 weeks ago, which is notable because of Wisconsin's fate since then, that Colorado, being the absolute cellar dweller in college football, was looking for a new head coach, and a lot of Colorado boosters were saying, maybe we can lure Paul Chryst from Wisconsin. I wonder if they're still high on that hire at this point. Let me tell you about Mitch Trubisky. Trubisky, who just lost his starting job to the youthful incomer from Pitt, Kenny Pickett. Poor titty-kissing Mitch. Take a look at these stats. In the most recent game against the New York Jets, a 24-20 loss. Oh, my God. Look at that QBR of 36.9.
Oh, yikes.
Here's the thing about Mitch. Mitch's specific comment when asked 2 weeks ago about the heat on his seat and how he could keep his job was, I just have to play better football. That's how anyone on the field keeps their job. He's right. I'm glad that he had a sober response to that question. The problem is that you want to talk about people not learning from past experiences. His quarterback rating for the Steelers in his tenure there is lower than it was for the Chicago Bears.
Wow.
He's getting worse. We're moving on to the picks. Starting with game 1, how about this? The TCU Horned Frogs, number 17, coming off an absolute destruction of the Oklahoma Sooners. Sorry, Aaron, they're in chat. They're 7-point favorites at the number 19. Oh my God, Kansas is undefeated, Mike. They're 5-0 in college football, not basketball. But they're 7-point underdogs at home as an undefeated ranked team. Mike, who do you got?
I think TCU's a better team, but I think Kansas has the big mo. So I'm going to take Kansas in this to cover that 7.
Man, this is a tough one. I'm actually going to go with TCU to win and cover the spread. I think Kansas is a feel-good story, but I mean, let's face it, Kansas really hasn't faced any of the major contenders yet this year in that 5-0 start. If I got to play Vandy the first 5 games of the year, maybe I'd be 5-0 too. We're moving on to the Pac-12. The Utah Utes, number 11 in the country. Remember Utah? Everyone sort of kind of forgot Utah after that Florida game. Yep. Utah has climbed their way back up to number 11 in the country, and they're 4.5-point favorites, traveling to play the UCLA Bruins, who are number 18 and also undefeated. Was Utah right to be forgotten, or are they back to being the class of the Pac-12?
This is a hard one for me. I'm going to go with the Bruins, though. I like the way the Bruins are trending upward. I don't like the fact that Utah lost to Florida. So
I'm actually going to go with UCLA as well. I think it's a little bit of a slap in the face that they're home dogs, despite being an undefeated ranked team. Playing at home always helps. But furthermore, they just had an impressive game against Washington, who was another at least decent team in the Pac-12. I think UCLA is a bit more for real than Kansas is. Yeah. So I'm going to go with UCLA. Moving on to the NFL, the New York Giants, who were one of the last undefeated teams until they lost to the mighty Cooper Rushes of Dallas. They're now a +8 underdog, playing the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay, it's at Green Bay, but that's a little bit misleading because the game's actually in London, England again this week. So not a true home game for Green Bay, but they're 8-point favorites despite being a last-second ditch effort away from losing to Bailey Zappi and the New England Patriots. 8-point favorites. What do you think?
Ooh. First off, I would not put any money on this game because those London games are weird.
Yes.
I mean, it's you put the travel in and all of that thing. Still 8, that's a big number. I'm gonna go with the Giants to cover. I still think the Packers will win, but I think it'll be a close game.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I mean, it's easy for us to say, well, it's Aaron Rodgers, it's Green Bay. Surely they can win this game. The Giants aren't for real. I tell you who is for real, though, is Saquon Barkley.
Yes, he is.
Saquon Barkley is a great running back. He's leading the NFL right now. And for them being at +8, if Saquon Barkley's alive, I'm actually taking the Giants and 8 points in that game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And finally, Cincinnati Bengals, who started the season so rough but have settled in and finally won a couple of games. They did just beat the Miami Dolphins, albeit with Tua spending a chunk of the game on the bench. They are +3 underdogs, coming off a big win, but they're underdogs, 3 points, traveling at Baltimore Ravens. It's in Baltimore. The Ravens, at least on paper, appear to be decent, except for they just keep losing. So what do you think?
I think they're going to keep losing. I'm not sold on Baltimore. I watched a little bit of the Baltimore game the last Sunday, and it's just I don't know. There's something it's off about that team, and I can't really put my finger on it. I think Cincinnati's riding the ship. I think that offensive line that they've basically rebuilt from scratch. I think it's starting to come together and get a little bit of cohesion. So we're going to take the Bengals.
I think if this game were in Cincinnati, I'd go Bengals, and I think with it being in Baltimore, I'd go Ravens.
Well, that's basically what the line's telling you.
Yeah, exactly. I think it is that close. I think the Ravens are going to come out firing in this game just because they know for them to right this ship. I know we're only 4 weeks into the season, but for them to right this ship and make the postseason, they got to win their divisional games at home. They got to do that before they do anything else. Look, they've been getting ripped in the media for weeks now that they can't finish a game. I think they'll finally finish a game, albeit with a little bit lower competition than what they've faced so far. So I'm going to go Ravens. Mike, do you have a final thought?
NHL regular season next week.
How about that? It's almost time for our hockey preview where I just sit here and listen to you talk for like 30 minutes.
Oh, that's always hard because I don't know.
All right. Before we roll the credits, guys, I actually have a little bit of a final thought. This is actually a real in memoriam. Rest in peace to Jim Redmond. For people that might not know that name, Jim Redmond was the father of Derek Redmond, who was a Olympic sprinter from Great Britain. And Jim and his son Derek gave us one of the most iconic scenes from the Olympics. This was 1992 in Barcelona.
Tom Hammond and Craig Masbach back at Olympic Stadium in Barcelona, coming up to the men's 400-meter semifinals. Here are the lane assignments. Steve Lewis in lane 3. Top 4 to Wednesday's final. Steve Lewis in lane 3. Roberto Hernandez out quickly in 4. Now down the backstretch.
Ismail on the left of the screen is running very, very quickly. And inside of Lewis, Sunday Bada of Nigeria.
And Derek Redmond of Great Britain has pulled up with an injury. Redmond is out.
Derek Redmond, the British record holder, and an important member of that British 4x400 meter relay team, as he doesn't want anybody to help him.
It'll be Lewis to win in 44.50.
Look at this. He's going to try to finish his semifinal race. The British have a certain tradition of running, which you have to respect.
A bizarre finish to this first semifinal in the men's 400 meters. Derek Redmond of Great Britain pulled up with an injury halfway down the backstretch. He's fighting off those trying to help him to finish the race in his lane. And now the pain too much. Swelling throughout Olympic Stadium. as Redmond, with assistance this time, approaches the finish line he had wanted so desperately to reach. That is the Olympic spirit.
Rest in peace, Jim Redmond, 81 years old. How about that? That's for the dads out there. Guys, thank you so much, and we will see you next week.
You have been listening to SportsBall with Mike Meharry and Alan Mosley. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Odyssey, all at Alan Mosley TV. You can also subscribe to the show on your favorite podcasting platforms. Just search for SportsBall with Mike and Alan. And you can find the weekly Sunken Cost Money Pit at Substack. Thanks for listening. We'll have more bread and circuses next week.